So, in the literature review of this article, it basically started off by already introducing what the study was going to focus on, which was examining how fathers are involved in caring for sons and daughters in a sample of dual earner families, um, and these families are also using daycare full time. So, a thing to consider in this study, the author pointed out, was that different groups, like whether it be ethnic groups or social groups or things like that, they could be related to father involvement, and they may differ between each group. So the author thought it was best to examine middle to upper middle class dual earner families in a homogeneous sample. Um, the literature basically showed that there is a tendency for fathers to be more interactive with sons than daughters because of what has been deemed appropriate gender roles. And basically, this means that fathers aren't acting as caregivers, mothers are acting as the caregivers, and fathers are basically acting as playmates with the children. And there would be two types of caregiving. When concerning the fathers, it would be time and tasks. These variables would really showcase fathers' involvement, according to the research that the author did. And there really hasn't been a link between child gender and family involvement, which is the gap that the author found. It also involved, for the specific gap, how mothers view the involvement of dads to their sons and daughters. So for the methods, a sample was examined of dual earner couples who were using full-time daycare. Also, since they were dual earner, both were working full-time employment outside the home. So there were around 50 or so dual earner families coming from central Pennsylvania, and there were interviews with mothers when their child was 1 year old, and they were also asked to complete a family environment scale. So through these two methods, the information collected was really concerning the amount of weekday time infants are spending in like different types of childcare arrangement, especially focusing on the dad's involvement. So for the results, it was found that in instances where fathers were alone with their infants, or were available to them, it was 20% less in both categories than mothers were. So it showed that mothers were really more available as caregivers in this sense. And there was also a trend towards father, pertaining more to gender, there was a trend displaying that fathers would engage in more caregiving tasks for their sons rather than their daughters, whereas which moms would be equal for sons and daughters in this situation. Um, um, the stigma, or the belief that fathers choose to spend more time with their sons rather than their daughters was actually supported in this study, as fathers were much more significantly available to their sons than they were to their daughters, and they also showed more caregiving characteristics to their sons than their daughters. And there, going back to like the mother's point of view, there was data that showed that mothers are alone more with their daughters than with their sons. So this really should be considered as basically like a gender role stereotype. and traditional gender roles displaying themselves in both mothers and fathers, not just fathers. So, in the end, the author basically stated that his results overall, they kind of contradicted what previous studies had said or showed. So, really, the process would need to be replicated in order to see if he did something wrong or something was off in the data, and just to get a better view of the results.